How's it going, folks? I'm Des with DesFit, and this video is all about comparing Apple's more budget-friendly options when it comes to Apple Watches with the entry-level Series 3 and the mid-level Apple Watch SE. The Apple Watch Series 7, it may have more bells and whistles than these two, but it also costs considerably more. And these two are still very capable smartwatches as well as activity trackers. In terms of similarities, they actually have a lot in common. So they both have Retina displays, both have heart rate sensors, both have GPS for tracking outdoor activities, both have altimeters, both are water resistant down to 50 meters, and the list goes on and on in terms of similarities, but there are some differences between these two that may make you want to choose one over the other. So just like all my reviews, I'll be covering all the features of these two devices, as well as going into a lot of detail into the sports and fitness performance in regards to GPS and heart rate accuracy, where I test these for running, cycling, weight training, as well as swimming, just so you can get a good idea of which device is going to be right for you. And if the information in this video does help you out at all, don't be shy about hitting that like button down below. So with both of these watches, they provide a fantastic smartwatch experience, being a very natural extension of your iPhone. On the connected side of things, you can receive and reply to text messages using quick responses where you just tap one of these and away it goes. You can even write on the screen, you can use emojis, and you can even use voice dictation. And then for calls, you can listen through the built-in speakers and then speak through the built-in microphones. But one difference here is that the SE is going to be slightly louder, being about 50% louder than the Series 3. One area where this differs though is in terms of cellular connectivity. So the SE comes in a GPS version or a GPS plus cellular version. They currently only offer a GPS version of the Series 3. So to have that text and call functionality with the Series 3, you'll need to be in range with your phone. But with the SE, you actually have the option of that cellular model to stay connected without your phone, but just note that there's going to be an additional fee to use that cellular connectivity that's going to be on top of your existing cell phone plan. And then there's a couple other features that are dependent on that cellular connectivity. So with a cellular SE, you'll also have international emergency calling as well as family setup, which basically family setup means that you'll be able to have a family member use the cellular SE without actually having an iPhone, but you will need an iPhone to set it up initially. And then in terms of the hardware, the size options are slightly different between these two, but both of these have a small and large version depending on your wrist size. So the Series 3 has a 38mm version as well as a 42mm version, which I'm wearing. And then the SE has a 40mm version. And then here I am wearing the 44mm version. Both of these have quite stunning Retina displays, but the SE's display is about 30% larger, and the display also blends in a little bit more seamlessly with the case. And then with the Series 3, it has more squared off edges where the display on the SE has rounded corners. What's interesting about the squared off corners though on the Series 3 is that you'll really only see these on screens where there's not a black background, and many portions of the interface have black backgrounds which kind of hide those squared off edges. And then another thing nice about all the Apple Watch size options is that the bands are interchangeable from large to large and small to small. So you can swap the band from a 42mm Series 3 to the 44mm SE, or swap a band from the 38mm Series 3 to the 40mm SE. With the Series 3, you can choose between a silver case with a white band or a space gray case with a black band. And then with the SE, you also have the additional option of a gold case. And then the SE also comes in a Nike edition where you can get a special watch band, a couple extra watch faces, as well as the Nike Run Club app pre-installed. But other than that, feature-wise, it's going to be the same. So all Apple Watches use a combination of a touchscreen along with two physical buttons, and one of these buttons is also a dial, which Apple calls a digital crown, and you can use this dial to scroll or zoom throughout different areas of the interface. Where this differs though is that the crown dial in the SE provides a little bit of haptic feedback or vibration when you're scrolling. It's nice to have, but I definitely wouldn't call this a standout difference between these two. From the software end of things, both the SE and the Series 3 run Apple's latest operating system, watchOS 8, and Apple has a pretty good history of supporting older devices when it comes to software. Now, where the experience differs here though is that the SE has a faster processor than the Series 3, so the SE feels a little bit snappier when navigating around. The Series 3 is still responsive, animations are smooth, and it's not like there's a huge delay or anything like that, but when you compare them side by side, there's a little bit of a difference. Battery life is going to be very similar with these two, where you'll get about 18 to 24 hours out of them, depending on how much you interact with your watch as well as how many outdoor activities that you track. Another difference is going to be in terms of how much internal storage these devices have. So the Series 3 has 8 gigabytes of internal storage and the SE has 32 gigabytes. And where this is going to make a difference is in terms of downloading music to the watch itself for listening without your phone nearby. If you plan on always having your phone with you, this really won't make a difference. And then on the health and fitness side of things, both of these have heart rate sensors, both have high and low heart rate notifications, irregular heart rhythm notifications, both can track your steps and other activities, and both can track your sleep. The SE also has fall detection, which can try to detect a hard fall and attempt to contact emergency services if you're unresponsive. And the SE also has noise monitoring to alert you if noise levels are going to be unsafe. Okay, so now let's talk about the sports and fitness features of these devices, and both of these can track a ton of different types of activities, from all the more common stuff like walking, running, weight training, and gym-based workouts like the elliptical, yoga, swimming, both outdoors and indoors, hiking. I mean, the list kind of just goes on and on here. Both these watches have GPS, so you'll be able to track your outdoor activities without having to bring your phone with you. However, if you do happen to bring your phone with you, what the watches will do is attempt to connect your phone and use your phone's GPS, which has an advantage of a slight savings in battery life. It's not a major difference, just a slight difference. However, cell phone signals can differ from area to area, and I want to test the actual GPS chips on the watches themselves. So in all the following examples, I either turned my phone completely off or just didn't even have my phone with me, just to ensure that I was testing the watches themselves. So on this run here, the total distance lined up nearly perfectly with the Series 3 and the SE, and they were all very close to the other devices that I was carrying in my hands. And then for the finer details of the GPS tracks, from a high level, you can't really tell much of a difference at all, but when we zoom in, we can start to see some very minor differences. So on this bottom corner right here, there's Series 3 swept just a smidge wide, where the SE was a bit more accurate, but really both were pretty good. One thing I do want to point out here is that Apple's made some recent update to their software, which has increased GPS accuracy on all their Apple Watches. So Apple Watches used to have this tendency of swooping around corners really wide or just cutting corners completely off, but I've seen this issue improve a lot. So for instance, here's a run I did last year with the SE around those exact same corners, and you can see that the SE completely blew through that corner, where today it provides a lot more detailed and accurate track. And then for longer distance activity like cycling, again, both the Series 3 and the SE did perfectly fine here, with all the devices coming in quite close to each other for the total distance. And then for the finer detail of the GPS tracks with the road biking, which involves some higher speeds, for the most part, the SE and the Series 3 do a good job. But what I noticed is that at these higher speeds, the Series 3 tends to be a little bit less accurate, where it may swoop around these corners just a little bit more than the SE. In the whole scheme of things, though, this won't be a make or break difference, but I do like to go into this level of detail in my reviews. Okay, so now onto heart rate. The Series 3 and the SE have heart rate sensors, but there are a few generations apart in terms of technology, but even so, both of these produce some very good results, but there's a slight difference between them. So let's first start out with one of the easiest activities for a wrist-based optical heart rate sensor to track accurately, and that's going to be indoor cycling, because you're pretty much going to be stationary the entire time. So, well, you may not even be able to see the orange and blue lines that represent the Series 3 and the SE, because they line up essentially perfectly with the chest and arm heart rate monitors that I was also wearing. You really can't ask for much better than that. So now onto some running, and on this run here, you can see that again, it's nearly perfect for both the watches, but there's a little bit more deviation from the Series 3. So at the beginning of the run, there's usually a slight delay from all heart rate sensors, which is pretty normal. Then they all lined up pretty nicely for the first 5 minutes. Right around the 6.5 minute mark, where my heart rate dipped slightly, the Series 3 read just a little bit high, but nothing to be concerned about. And then right here is a little bit slow to react to the rise in heart rate, but seriously, these are still some really great results from both of these watches. Okay, so now let's get to some activities that are a bit more challenging for these types of sensors to track accurately, and we'll first start out with some road biking outside. So there was a little bit of initial lining up of all the sensors at the beginning again, but for basically the entire ride, both of them did great. There was a spot right here at 5 minutes into the ride where the Series 3 had a little bit of a blip, and then another slight blip here, but really, I can't complain about these results. But now let's test these sensors for some activities that are very challenging for wrist-based optical heart rate sensors, and those include mountain biking as well as weight training. With mountain biking, there's a ton of gripping that happens holding onto the handlebars, as well as a lot of vibrations from the rough terrain, which wrist-based optical heart rate sensors just don't handle well usually. And here's where we can start to see a few more imperfections, but still, this is a pretty good result. So for the first half of the ride, things were great from both the Series 3 and the SE. On this rise in heart rate right here after a stop, the SE had a little bit of a wobble, but then it got back in line. Right here is where things get a little bit more interesting, where both of them lost track a little bit, but this was on a rougher section of trail. And then on the remainder of the ride, there was a little bit of shakiness from the Series 3, but nothing crazy by any means. And other than this section right here, I have to say that these are pretty darn good results for wrist-based optical heart rate for mountain biking. But now let's get to one of the hardest activities for a wrist-based optical heart rate sensor to get right, and that's going to be weight training, where just like mountain biking, there's a lot of gripping going on as you're holding onto the weights, but you also have the added variable of lots of arm movement. And in general, this is where most wrist-based optical heart rate sensors fail, but in the whole scheme of things, these are good results for weight training for both of these watches. However, what you'll notice is that the Series 3 was just slightly less accurate than the SE, where on a couple of these sets, it read a little bit high, but there was really nothing wild out of either device, and both also tracked the high intensity intervals at the end very well. Overall, in terms of heart rate accuracy, both of these do a really good job. The SE may be just slightly more accurate, but really you're not going to go wrong with either of these. Oh, and lastly, I also wanted to talk about how well these watches do estimating distances running indoors on a treadmill, as well as swim tracking. So on this run here, the Series 3 came in just a little bit over the treadmill distance, and then the SE was a little bit closer, but really both did a pretty good job here. And then for pool swimming, both of these will track your distance and laps automatically without you having to press any keys or anything like that. And you can see that the total distance lined up. And then for the sets, you can see here how both can detect your swim time versus rest time in between sets, as well as your stroke type. And then other than the first set, which had a little bit of difference between the two, all the other sets lined up perfectly fine. So when it comes to the sports and fitness capabilities of the SE and the Series 3, there's really not that much of a difference. Both of these can track a lot of different types of activities, both of them have really good heart rate sensors, and both of them can even do automatic workout detection. The Series 3 is a nice inexpensive way of getting into an Apple Watch, and it still performs great, but it is getting a little bit dated at this point. So at full asking price, there's an $80 difference between these two, and at this point in time, I would highly encourage you to get an SE if you can. The good news though is that both of these watches will undoubtedly be going on sale during the holiday season, and I'll have some links down in the description below where you can check the latest pricing. And those are affiliate links that help support the channel without costing you anything additional, and it's also a great way of helping support the channel if the information in this video helped you out at all. And another thing that you can do that'll help this video out is hitting that like button, as well as subscribing to the channel for plenty more sports tech videos that are coming soon. In the meantime, have fun with your fitness, and we will see you in the next video.